Hello, welcome to the second video in the Only Mums and Dads What About Aruna series. You may remember in the first video we looked at child development and how that can help you look after your child when you're going through a separation or a divorce. In this session we're going to look at what is the impact of separation and divorce on children. And what can we therefore do to help them cope with it? Well, I'm going to give you some clues because the two main things you can do is reduce conflict and reduce absence. But I'll tell you why as we go through today's session. So, what is the impact of parental separation on our children? Before I tell you, I'd like you to have just a moment, just to stop and think about your child or your children. What do you think the impact has been on them of your separation or divorce? You may need to think about how they are, what they do, what they say, how they feel, how they eat, how they sleep. All sorts of things that give us clues about how they have been impacted by your separation and divorce. And this is something you may need to keep asking yourselves forevermore. What is the impact? Not so that you can feel bad about yourself, but more so you can figure out what can I therefore do to help my child. Now, what research has found over many years of lots of explorations is that children who have parents who have separated or divorced are more likely to have difficulties with their mood, social interactions, self-identity, attention, relationships, learning, self-esteem. So it's quite a list, isn't it? Basically what this means is if a child is going through or has experienced the separation of their parents, they may have difficulties with friendships at school. They may be less likely to concentrate and focus at school. Maybe their grades go down a little bit. They might talk about feeling rubbish about themselves. I'm no good at this, I'm no good at that. Nobody wants to be with me anyway. They may stop doing things that they used to enjoy doing, like football or basketball. They may just want to be by themselves a lot more. And as we saw in last time's session, they actually might be asking for attention and care from you in a different way. They might be getting more controlling, a bit more bossy, a bit more rude or rebellious. So these are the kinds of things that children have difficulties with anyway in life, don't they? But if you stick in a parental separation, it makes it slightly more likely that this is the case. And research has told us that this impact is going to carry on into adulthood. So it's not just in their childhood that they're having these difficulties. It may well lead to difficulties in adulthood as well. And these difficulties, especially in older teenagers and in young adults. If you remember from video 1 where we looked at child development, adolescence goes on until you're like 24, 25. So the impact of separation will also occur even if your child has moved out of home, theoretically, or is living away from home with their own partner. But what we have to do is be very cautious about how we interpret all of these research findings. There is no perfect study of what the impact is of divorce on children. There's a lot of different findings, but basically we have to be very cautious in how we interpret it. So, what do we know? Well, I was listening to Desert Island Discs, which is on Radio 4 a little while back, and Richard Osman was there. And he was talking about his experience of parental separation. His dad left the home and he was, I think, when Richard was about 9 years old. And there's just a quote that conjures and summarises the impact of divorce on a child so beautifully. And he said, "I certainly shut a bit of myself down, that's for sure, because it's pretty painful, especially when you're a kid. We cannot get away from the fact that it's pretty painful for a kid when their parents separate." You might ask yourself, do boys and girls have different experiences? Well, lots of research shows lots of different things about boys and girls, but overall they are more similar than they are different. But if you are a parent of a boy and a girl, you'll see they actually do some things differently. So what research shows or indicates is that initially boys seem to be a bit more affected, while girls have this delayed effect. So in childhood, for example, boys may show more behavioural problems, whereas girls will have higher rates of emotional difficulties, which may only emerge in early adulthood. So they may look as if they're coping okay, girls, but they'll start feeling a bit more anxious, a bit more down, and this pops out in early adulthood, for example, early 20s, something like that. In adolescence, in general, girls have more difficulties in adolescence. But what research shows is that older adolescent girls have more anxiety and depression as a reaction to parental separation than boys. So, roughly, if we bring it together, boys will react more obviously, more strongly initially. Girls may look as if they're coping, but what you will see is that they may have higher anxiety and depression levels a little bit later on in time. So just worth bearing in mind. Now, what is it about parental separation that has this impact? How can mum and dad deciding that actually they don't want to live in the same house together have an impact on mood and concentration and learning and self-identity and self-esteem? Well, it's because of two main culprits: absence and conflict. So if we have a context initially, we know that it's the context of the separation rather than the separation itself that can have the biggest negative impact. And what do I mean about that? Well, absence. Physical separation from a parent can have a major impact on a child. But, and this is the thing that we talk about less, psychological absence of a parent can have a major impact on a child. So let's say your child, let's say dad has left the home, I still see dad twice a week, I live at home with mum. So as a child, I've got to cope with not seeing dad for 5 days of the week. But I've also got to cope with the fact that even though I see mum almost every day, she's just not there with me. She seems distracted, busy, impatient, stressed, worried, sad, and that in fact as a child I'm having to cope with the absence, the psychological absence of my resident parent as well as the physical absence of my non-resident parents. That's a lot of absence to have to deal with all of a sudden. We know the other culprit is conflict. Now, children don't necessarily need to see violence to be affected by it. They don't necessarily need to see conflict for it to start weighing on their mind and impacting on them. So we have to be very, very careful as parents when we think about conflict and how that is playing out for our child. Now, we're going to go into both a little bit more detail. So absence. Overall, the research suggests that divorce affects fathering more than mothering. So, for example, there was a study looking at adolescent boys. And they saw that when the father has left home, the contact with them is so important for that adolescent boy in terms of their well-being, in terms of their adjustment. But because they're an adolescent boy, they don't know quite how to initiate this contact. So they think, I won't text dad because I'm not sure he actually wants to spend that much time with me and he's left the home, so maybe I'll just leave him to it. And actually these adolescent boys are so desperate for contact with their father, but they don't quite know how to initiate it. And we do know that although parental separation is something that's happened in the past, the continued absence of a father is part of their daily lives, has a major impact on a child. So we know mothering is impacted by a parental separation, but more often than not, fathers and fathering is very much affected because they are no longer there as part of their child's daily lives. So trying to figure out ways of still being part of your child's daily life is so important. But what about girls and fathers? So do you remember in our last video we talked about a study which showed that for teenage girls a big part of feeling good about themselves was doing something with dad, having an activity that they do with dad. And again, research around divorce has found that for girls you can have divorce which leads to depression. But actually what happens is that in the middle is a lack of closeness to dad, and low self-esteem was the missing link. So not the divorce per se, it's more that the fact of losing that closeness to dad, which made them feel very sad and hopeless. And in another study, they found that girls who felt close to their non-resident dad, who have an authoritative parenting style, we'll come back to that in a mo, did better at school and had fewer psychological difficulties. So there's something about that feeling close to fathers, even if the father does not live in the home anymore with the child, feeling close to them is so important for girls as well as boys. So absence is something that we need to think about. Now, conflict. Is it possible to have a separation or divorce without conflict? Before? during, after, it's pretty impossible, isn't it? So there will have been conflict around, and we know conflict casts a long shadow. I want you to have a little stop for a moment just to have a think about when you witnessed conflict. So this isn't conflict that you've been part of, it's not an argument that you've been part of, but it was maybe an experience of sitting in a restaurant and suddenly the couple next to you, in a table next to you, start having a big argument. Or it could be friends that you know who always bicker with one another. Or it could be at work. You're in a meeting and someone starts getting a little bit shirty with somebody else and there's a bit of conflict. Have a think about the last time you witnessed conflict. How did it feel to you? Because chances are you felt quite stressed about it. You felt a little bit worried and scared and your eyes were shooting everywhere. Hold on, who's going to manage this situation? A bit worried. And actually that's what it's like for children when they experience conflict around them. They don't need to be part of it, they just need to be aware of it. And it can create that same reaction in them of stress and anxiety and worry and fear. And annoyance. There's nothing more annoying than being with people who bicker all the time. It's annoyance as well. So, what does research tell us? Research tells us that seeing or hearing conflict is linked to difficulties with peer relationships. So, if they're hearing conflict at home, chances are they'll go into the playground and they will reenact that with their friends. But they will do it in a childlike way, much more clumsy and obvious, which means they could get into trouble a lot more and they'll miss their friendships and they'll lose their friendships. We also know that when you are hearing or seeing or being aware of conflict, it can lead to difficulties with concentrating and learning. So you're sitting in your maths lesson and there's all this focusing that you need to be doing, but actually all you could think about was how mum looked in that last argument, or dad's tone of voice when you heard them arguing downstairs. Hearing or seeing conflict can be linked to social withdrawal. You're feeling a bit scared, things just feel a bit uncertain and unpredictable, so actually what do? You withdraw, you become a little turtle or a tortoise and you put your head back in the shell. You withdraw. You say, nah, I don't want to do football anymore. Nah, I'm not interested in ballet anymore. No, I don't want to go to karate anymore. Because it's just a bit scary. Life's a bit scary, so you withdraw. And we all know that once we start withdrawing from things, things get harder to do and we start getting more and more miserable. And it can lead to behaviour changes. So children learn by watching and imitating parents. If they watch and imitate parents who are cross and mean to each other and can't stand the sight of each other and hate each other, then this is the behaviour that your child is going to present to the world because they've learnt it from you. So actually hearing and seeing conflict is going to impact on their behaviour. Children may not talk about what they have heard or seen, so it looks as if they've not noticed it. And this is what a parent and I talked about once when we were talking about conflict within the family. It started off as a conversation, but oh, no, my child's not actually seen anything. They weren't there when we had the arguments. They were unaware of it. Well, just because your child isn't saying to you each morning, Dad, I heard the argument, Mum, I heard what you said, that doesn't mean they haven't noticed it and that it's not having an impact on them. So be very, very mindful of the conflict that your child is being exposed to, even if they're not in the room with you. So, how can you help your child? What researchers have done is pulled together a list of risk factors and protective factors. What are the things that makes it more difficult for your child? And what is the things that makes it easier for your child to cope with your separation? So, the things that make it difficult for your child to cope is intense conflict, as we've just seen. Problematic parenting. I mean, that covers so much, doesn't it? And we're going to have a look at parenting in a moment. But just not being a great parent. We're all not great parents at times, but we need to be good enough. Not perfect, just good enough. Number 3, parents with little time and availability. So we've looked at absence as one of the big culprits for impact of divorce. Poor quality of home environment and chaotic being one of the biggies. So it may come as a surprise to you, but children are happier when they come from homes that are relatively organised. That's all. relatively organised. They've kind of got their PE kit ready. They've sort of got a packed lunch. Parents tend to turn up on time to pick them up from things. That there's a level of organisation. Now, we don't need to be a supersonic level of organisation, but just some sense of organisation. Because imagine if you went to work every day for a manager who was very chaotic. It'd be stressful, annoying, frustrating. So this is what it's like for children when parents are chaotic. It's not great for them. Now, the other thing that we know, and I'm sure you've been told this 100 times, 1,000 times, we hear it everywhere, don't we? Don't criticise the other parent. It's so easy to hear and so hard to do. But for our children, research shows that this is one of the biggies when it comes to risk factors for how that divorce is going to impact on them. We also know that fighting for our child's love and loyalty will have a very negative impact on our children, as will a child being forced to form allegiance to one parent over the other. So we know those things. You'll have heard it before, but actually really thinking about it. And what are we doing when we criticise other parents or fight for our child's love or force them to form an allegiance? We're actually creating an impossible situation for our child to cope with. So no wonder that makes it harder for them to deal with the divorce, the separation. But what are the protective factors? What can we do to help our children get through this separation divorce? Well, having at least one supportive parent who treats them like individuals. Now, this is really important because when you're going through a separation or a divorce, your capacity to think about your child is going to be reduced because you've got so much on your mind, so much to have to do and think about and plan and organise and cope with. So being able to treat them as an individual is quite difficult to do, but it's an incredibly important thing to do. Parental sensitivity is also important, and that means being sensitive to your child. Just being able to think about what they need a little bit, what's going on for them. You know, we talked about in the last video, in the child development video, about being able to figure out the age and the stage of development of your child and what that means about how they think about separation and divorce. So being sensitive to that. Fathers are a crucial part of a child's life. Crucial. Absolutely crucial. So being involved in a child's life helps reduce the impact for that child. And time. Time is a simple, yet, really quite difficult to manage thing to do for your child. Time. Just time. And if you don't have lots of time, just really inject the time that you do have with your child with love and affection. Having a strong support network for you is critical, because this means then you feel stronger and more able to look after your child in the way that they need you to. And authoritative parenting. Now, I mentioned that a few moments ago, and this is the gold standard of parenting. Authoritative parenting. Now, Baumrind came up with this theory of parenting styles quite a long time ago. And what the suggestion is that there's a matrix, and on the vertical line you've got responsiveness, and that is your ability to respond to your child. And then across the horizontal line is demandingness, how many demands you place on your child. So I'm going to go around and tell you about the different parenting styles, of which authoritative is the absolute gold standard, and you'll see why in a minute. Now, if you are high in responsiveness but low in demands, you have what we would call a permissive parenting style. Yeah, whatever you want. Yeah. So there's very few expectations, very few rules. It's very indulgent and accepting, quite lenient, not much confrontation at all, quite warm, and responsive to your child, but there's very little that you're really expecting your child to do. And this is the permissive parenting style. Not great. Now, if we go down to the uninvolved parenting style, this is low in responsiveness and low in demandingness. Basically, I don't care. There's few expectations. There's no rules. You're quite passive, neglectful and disinterested, basically, and absent. Even if you're absent in your mind, as opposed to physically absent. And there's competing priorities. So, work's more important, friends are more important. So this uninvolved parenting style will be no surprise to you. Not great either. Now, let's switch along to the right-hand side to authoritarian parenting style. So this is low in responsiveness, high in demands. And this kind of parenting style is characterised with, because I said so, because I'm your parent. And this is high expectations, very clear rules, very forceful and autocratic, quite rigid, lots of punishment, and limited warmth. Now, this is maybe the Victorian parenting style, authoritarian, not great for the child. Now we get to the authoritative parenting style up in this top right hand corner. This is high responsiveness, but high in demands as well. So you have high expectations of your child and you have clear standards and you're being quite assertive about things. No, you do need to do this, but you're doing it with warmth and with flexibility and in a responsive way and in a democratic way. You say, okay, let's have a chat about this then. What's the problem here? Let's have a chat about it. This authoritative parenting style where you combine warmth and love and affection and flexibility with clear expectations of your child is the way forward. When you're going through a separation or a divorce, it is so easy to switch to one of the other parenting styles. So easy because you feel so bad and guilty about what's happened. You become a permissive parent. So when your child comes to you for the weekend, there's no expectations, there's no rules, let's just have fun. That's not great for your child. And it might be that you're so stressed and you're so worried about everything that you head towards the authoritarian style. Listen, you've just got to do it. You've got to do it because I'm telling you to. This is not great for your child either. So authoritative, where you combine, you've still got very clear expectations of your child, but you combine it with warmth. That is so important as a way of helping your child cope with the impact of separation and divorce. So, what can you do to help your child cope with separation and divorce? Reduce conflict, and especially conflict which your child can see or hear, but conflict that you think they can't see or hear as well. Work together to ensure there's no significant absence for your child to have to manage. If there is an absence, what can you both do to help that communication going? Do not expect your child to initiate it. They are just kids. What can you do, both of you together, to help contact going? So even if there is a physical absence, there is not a psychological absence. Use authoritative parenting. Both of you use authoritative parenting. You're not letting your child get away with whatever you want. You still have expectations of them, but you're doing that with warmth and love. Keep a good routine. Remember, chaotic houses are not good for kids. Keep a good routine. Simplify life. Plan, prepare, whatever it takes to help your child believe that they're living in a relatively organised house with a good routine. And remember that separation and divorce is a process. It's not a discrete event. It's not a one-off thing. It is something that is going to impact on your child for the rest of their lives. So trying to do it well, trying to do it in a way that helps them know that you've got them there in the centre of your mind is absolutely crucial. And look after yourself. This is so important because unless you are looking after yourself, you can't look after your child. We'll come back more to that in future sessions. So, parental separation does have a short-term and a long-term impact on children, whatever their age they are, whether they're 1 year old when you separate or 19 or 24 years old when they separate. It is going to have an impact, and understanding that and accepting that is a very important step. But it's the factors around the separation rather than the separation itself that has the greatest impact. And the two things that we've looked at in particular are conflict and absence. To trying to reduce conflict and trying to increase communication and presence are the key factors, along with being an authoritative parent. Good luck with all of that. I hope it's helped you to understand a little bit more about the impact of separation and divorce on your children. And thank you so much to our sponsors for making this project possible. Couldn't do it without you. Thank you very much. If you like this, please press like, subscribe, and please feel free to share this with your network. Goodbye.